Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, back with our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford.
Nice to be here, Joy.
Thank you, Larry. As many of our listeners have likely heard by now, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, issued an arrest warrant against Israel's President Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes against humanity in Gaza. And today we're going to discuss who the ICC is and how much power they have to make and enforce these changes. Larry wrote an article last week on the subject of the ICC. You can view all of Larry's articles at our website, www.ascf.us. Please sign up for our newsletter to receive notices of upcoming webinars, podcasts, and articles. So Larry, a lot of Americans seem to be much more leery of international organizations these days, and a lot for good reasons.
Yes.
Something I learned from your article that I didn't know was the ICC doesn't act if a country has an existing legal system.
Yes.
So can you kind of go into more detail?
Actually, the ICC stands for International Criminal Court. I think it should be renamed the International Court of Criminals and Clowns, ICCC. They're going after Israel and they're going after the Western civilization. And they're patently anti-Semitic, have been all along, and this is just reinforced that they issued, and the ICC goes after individuals. The United Nations has an international court system that goes after countries. And the ICC is separate from the United Nations. It's headquartered in The Hague, Netherlands. There's 124 nations that fund it by themselves. It's not funded by the UN. The US, Russia, China, Turkey, and several other countries are not members of the ICC. I don't know their reasons, but the American reason is the Americans do not want its citizens brought to court before an international court that's not American. We have our own judicial system. We'll take care of it.
And like you said in their charter, we have a legal system.
And we enforce it. And also, we're afraid with American soldiers deployed all over the world for the last 20 or 30 years, fighting all over the world, that charges will be brought against them in an international court. And to me, there's no question. It's in the process right now. The ICC is investigating America for various wars and things that have gone in. So I think it's a wise decision to stay out of the international court system. But Russia and China do it. And I would add that when the ICC, just to show the hypocrisy of it all, issued the warrants against Netanyahu, they issued warrants against several Hamas leaders who were known to be dead. So they're equating the actions of Hamas, who murdered, raped, tortured 1,400 Jewish citizens and American citizens in Gaza, equating that invasion and atrocity to the Jewish response of defense to eliminate the threat of Hamas. It's totally an upside-down world where charges were made. Now, the lead prosecutor in the ICC is a guy named Khan. He's a British barrister of Pakistani descent, and he belongs to a Muslim sect called the Ahmadi. And the Ahmadis were founded back in the British Empire days of India with the belief that they're the leaders on the rejuvenation of Islam. Ironically, in many parts of the Islamic world, especially in the Sunni world, they're considered heretics. So, the ironies abound. He's also, by the way, been accused by a well-known legal lawyer in the ICC, female, of sexual misbehavior. So that one's working its way
through. Maybe they need to investigate him as an individual.
Precisely, yes. And so, but again, it's part of the culture attack, the attack on civilization against the West. And it resonates. I mean, the ICC has no legal authority. All it can do is issue a warrant and depend upon member nations to enforce the warrant. And so we have esteemed leaders like Justin Trudeau of Canada, who recently was dancing the night away at a Taylor Swift concert while Muslims were rioting in the streets of Montreal against Israel.
I was going to get to that actually because I read that in your article, and so I was going to say, what would happen to Netanyahu if he stepped foot in Canada?
He'd be arrested, and then I don't know what happens, to be honest with you. That's a good question. I do not know the process if they get arrested. I do know that the ICC in the past has issued arrest warrants for some African leaders. They go after, remember all the wars in Africa and the tribal. They've arrested some of them, and they ended up in jail. So I don't know who prosecutes them. It must be the ICC who prosecutes them, because I think they're serving in jail in the Netherlands.
Oh, okay. So the ICC goes after individuals, and you said the UN has a separate council that goes after countries.
Right.
Now, what happened with the Rwandan genocide? Would that be
some
UN,
of those guys. Well, that was individuals because there wasn't any country involved.
Okay.
There was tribes and stuff like that.
Right.
So anyways, but I guess the point I'm making, and I should have known the answer to that. The point I'm making is that it affects the worldwide perception of Israel being the wrong side of history, going after the poor Muslims in Gaza. And it just goes on. And Trudeau, for example, he also gets involved in allowing terrorists to enter the United States, and he's such a hypocrite. The NATO objective is 2% a year of GDP, and Canada hasn't made that since the 80s, and he's led the government. Remember the COVID lockdowns? He was arresting the truckers and seizing their bank accounts. Yeah, so he's not a nice guy. And the other aspect, of course, is South Africa has to jump in because they're a Marxist-led country, and they're jumping into the UN saying that Israel should be tried in the UN court for atrocities being committed in Gaza. No mention is made of all the atrocities that Muslims are committing against Christians all over Africa and the Middle East.
I was reading that South Africa was trying to compare Israel to the apartheid issues they were had there. So how, you said they don't have legal authority. How can they, the ICC, issue these arrest warrants against people in countries that are not even members of the ICC? Well,
Netanyahu, if he sets foot in Canada, he theoretically could be arrested because that's what the leader said. Other countries say we're going to ignore the ICC because they have no enforcement abilities. They can't enforce it. It's up to countries willing to agree with the warrant that the actions will take place. So.
And what were they going to do with the Hamas leaders? I mean, since Palestine's not even a
they're not
country,
alive.
Right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's another example of hypocrisy and anti-Semitism and anti-Western civilization, because they're going after Israel, they go after America.
So peace through strength strategy, what should the U.S., and the U.S. is not a member and shouldn't be a member as you said, but what should the U.S., do you believe, do about these meaningless warrants?
Well, my feeling is that we should make life miserable for Mr. Khan of the ICC and maybe issue sanctions to him so he can't set foot in the United States. So there's all sorts of things we can do.
That's big for you because you're not a big sanctions person.
No, I'm not. I don't believe in sanctions, but we can bar people. I believe in sanctions in trade, for example, barriers type of thing, but not sanctions broad scope. And so we can go after them individually, but I think the broad aspect is the United States should harness its energies and be more supportive of making America great again. And the UN is a perfect example. It's an international organization that is biased against the United States and certainly biased against Israel with all the resolutions it passes. And the United States mandatory dues are around $3 billion. And China's is $2 billion. But the United States, instead of spending $3 billion a year on UN activities, spends a total of $18 billion. In other words, $15 billion of voluntary contributions to various UN agencies. China spends $2 billion a year, and they've got far more influence in the UN and its agencies than the United States. So my feeling is we shouldn't spend any more money than is necessary, and we should start being much more assertive in representing the rights of America and Western civilization. The Chinese, supposedly if you're an employee of the UN, you're working for the world. You're working for the United Nations. That isn't the way it works for the Chinese employees of the UN. They work for China. And Americans go in there, good guy Americans, and think about the world and how it can make it a better place. Not so good. So we should be much more assertive in our foreign policy, not in a military way, but certainly much more in a diplomatic way and a gray zone way where we assert our influences and things like that. So,
good points. And I always wondered how U.S. soldiers really would manage under a world system of the UN militarily. I mean, how are they going to be supportive of things we don't agree with or believe in?
Well, we know the UN has those volunteer military forces, say, in Africa, and all you read about is the corruption and raping of the locals. And so I'm not sure I'd want to work under the leadership of any other country other than America.
Exactly.
Now, the Allied, we've worked with allies in World War II, we worked with allies in Korea and Vietnam, and then in the Gulf Wars. So, but it's always been under American leadership. So,
and we have allies now,
yeah,
but we retain our sovereignty.
Precisely, and Western allies too. So, it makes a big difference. And so, native allies is an important feature in alliance. Japan and South Korea. The battle of the minds keep on going on.
It does. Well, thank you for your assessment and your paper on the ICC. And to our listeners, please subscribe, share, and comment on our YouTube and Rumble channels. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Substack, and listen to your audio podcast either on Apple or your Android phone. Please consider becoming a member of the ASCF at our website, www.ascf.us. Membership includes a paid Substack subscription where Larry also writes articles as well as other writers and podcasts. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you to our listeners, and join us again next time for our Peace Through Strength podcast.